All right, let's go ahead and get started this morning. First time to teach adult Bible class, so this is going to be an experience for me. I spoke with Sean whenever I heard he was going out of town, and I thought it'd be a good experience. You know, sometimes it's good for us to step outside of our comfort zone, because at that point, you know, you can grow a little bit. And so that's what I'm doing this morning, and so we'll see how this goes. We will be studying, continuing our study in the book of James. And I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's a privilege. All right, and I love discussion as well. I have taught the teenage class a little bit. I like the teenage class, and I have only because not necessarily just this one here, but teenage classes in general, because of the format that we use in the church. It's a little bit more conducive to open discussion. Larger groups like this is kind of more difficult. But feel free to comment and discuss and speak up. I'm all ears. I don't presume upon the knowledge of this audience. I'm just a quarter of a century year old, and I'm sure there's a lot more knowledge and experience in this room than what I'm even able to compare to. So my role more so today is to facilitate the conversation, hopefully. So let's dig in then. Chapter 5. We'll do verses 1 through 6. And I would like to ask some of the men to read some of the passages as well. Again, getting some more participation. Brother Lipsy, would you mind reading that for us?
Sure.
1 through 6. Yes, sir.
Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which have been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outery of those who did the harvesting has reached your ears, of the Lord of Sabbath, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter.
In verse 6. It's all right.
You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you.
Thank you, brother. Okay. So this is pretty harsh. It's starting off with the wealthy in the congregation that James is addressing here. What do you think is the purpose of this passage as we're reading through here? What is James trying to tell us? What do you think? He's talking about the rich, the wealthy. This is pretty scathing stuff here too. It really, verse 3, your gold and your silver are corroded. Their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasures in the last days. What can we take from this? What do you think, Brother Dex?
Maybe repent while we're still time.
Mm-hmm.
Change the ways, because last days are soon comes.
Keeping the priorities straight, making sure they don't put their wealth above the heavenly things. Anyone else? Life on earth is temporary.
Well, the gold and silver and riches aren't going to save you, whether it's from physical destruction, the coming of the Roman army, for example. You could be a very rich Jew or a very rich Christian, and that's not going save you from that oppression, nor is that going to save you in the day of judgment.
I just see a lot of selfish comments. You know, being greedy with your money, you can't do yourself. He talks about self-indulgence. You know, it's always been about you.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't matter anybody else. It was all about you. And the day's coming, and you're trying to awaken them. It's not all about you.
Right.
This stuff isn't for you. Trying to remind them.
They're focused on the wrong place. Brother Steve?
I was thinking about applying it to much like business today that we deal with. How many people are underpaid at work? Very much, hard labor and get paid very cheap for it. Not really because they just don't care, because they have to get some kind of pay because they're just scraping to get by. And their employers or whoever hired them may take advantage of their desperation to get money and then overwork them and just give them only what they need to get by. And people are almost kind of stuck dealing with that because they need money somehow, but they're almost getting misused and abused in the process.
So even taking into consideration your fellow man whenever it comes to those that are benefiting off of they're making wealth off of the backs of other people, so to speak.
Yeah, because some of us can say, well, I'm just going to quit my job and I'll find another job. But we may be qualified and also have the financial status to be able to do that. Some people can. They say, I need a check every single week or else I'm going to be in bad trouble. And so therefore, because of that, other people who are over them, who pay them, may know of that, and therefore, out of their greed, may abuse that opportunity and take advantage of their workers, underpay them, so they'll get more work done for their company, but less pay going out to the workers, and the higher ups, as it were, get more.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to remember he's talking to Christians here. He's talking to Christians who are rich and are doing these things. So these are men who appear to be religious, yet in their private lives they are defrauding other people. In reality, they're causing the name of the church and the name of Christ to be brought down because of what they're doing. People look at them and think, here you are, you're wealthy, you've got all these things, yet you still, even though you claim to be religious, you're worse than the people that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to remember, these aren't just the average people he's talking to. He's talking to Christians who are doing this.
Right. And it makes it even worse because they should know better.
Correct.
Yeah, I totally agree. Going back even to the point that Holly made, the focus being on, for those that are wealthy, this is not about you, speaking to the wealthy person. This life and the things that you have, it's not all about you. And whenever I go through and read this, I think for myself, it reminds me of the priorities in life. And I know somebody else had made a comment along those lines as well. But for those that are wealthy, there's a certain amount of pride there because they don't have to rely on anybody else necessarily. All of the wealth that they've accumulated is what they've done. They feel as if whether it's off the backs of somebody else, like Brother Steve was talking about, or not, they feel like this is all me. This is all what I've done. And as I was going through and doing this study, it reminded me of the passage in Luke 12, 19 through 21, with the parable of the rich man. Had all of the wealth dispensed throughout various places, and he thought, I'm going to build one barn, and I'm going to accumulate all my wealth and put it in that one barn. And lo and behold, his soul was called that very night. And again, it goes to illustrate the fact that this man was proud in that story. And whenever we get to be proud, then we begin to feel as if we don't need God in our lives because we're in control. And whenever something doesn't happen that's beyond our control, like a family member is sick and they has to be hospitalized and they have to recover, then we turn to God. If all of a sudden we lose our job and we're sore in debt, then we turn to God. Because all of a sudden, what we thought we had control over, we no longer have control over. But that's the reality all along. Any further comments on 1 through 6? There may be some little nuggets of truth in here that I even am missing or overlooking. So feel free to interject if there's something else that you feel is sticking out in this passage.
Matthew 6:19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal.
Thank you, Terry. That's a good verse to support. Brother Clemens? What? Say that again. What the rich man has? Yes. What is God's anyhow? Mm-hmm. That's right. Again, keeping things in perspective for us as human beings, and especially for these people who were Christians and were wealthy, they were losing their perspective. Verse 6 is kind of separated almost as I was going through and studying this. In that, I guess it goes more so to the heart of pride, and this is the reason why James addresses this, in that they were so proud and full of themselves, they condemned and murdered the just one, being Christ. He doesn't resist them, though. I think that this is a great testimony of the love of Christ, and that in spite of all of this arrogance and pride, Christ still loves them. And James obviously loves them enough to instruct them, turn away from these thoughts and these feelings that you have, being so puffed up. There's a lot, looking back on the study as we've come up to chapter 5, there's been a lot of attention given to pride and the need to be humble. I think there was a reason for that in the audience that James was trying to address. Okay, so we have no further comments on...
I got one just addition.
Mm-hmm.
In the context here, they seem to be hoarding their wealth in the last days there. And the condemnation, I think, can be extended to this, that these people are about ready to face horrible persecution. And what James is saying, wealth, even if you have cheated others to build up your wealth, that's not going to save you. Because you're going to lose it all.
Mm, yep.
So the implication is you have to depend on God. And that's what he's been telling them all along in the first 4 chapters here, is that you have to have faith, you have to get your priorities right. And because this isn't going to get you through what's about to happen.
Right.
And if the date of this book, there's kind of a discussion over when it was an early book or late, but even if it was, one of the later books, it's not many years further that the Roman army is going to take Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And all that hoarded wealth is not going to be any good.
Again, keeping in mind what really redeemed them in the first place. It wasn't the wealth, it was the blood of Christ that redeemed them. Yeah. Okay, let's go on then. So that's a warning to the wealthy, and let's look at patience in suffering now, verses 7 through 11, and then we'll cover 12 next. So 7 through 11. Brother Jack, would you mind reading? I asked the men to read some of the verses here.
Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient over it, until it receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Murmur not, brethren, one against another, that ye have not judged. Behold, the judge standeth before the doors. Taketh, brethren, for an example of suffering and patience, the prophets who spake in the name of the Lord. Behold, we call them blessed that they endured. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, now that the Lord is full of pity and mercy.
All right. Okay, and again with this passage, just keep this question in mind because I'm going to be asking as we make our way through the study is the purpose of it. I want us to be thinking about, as we're reading this, why is James writing this? Why is he addressing this? How does this apply to me? So, for this passage, talking about patience and suffering, what is the purpose of this passage? What are your thoughts?
Sometimes it's hard for us as Christians to go through our days because we know we're going to be persecuted every day because we are Christians, and it talks about here do not grumble against one another. So if we have complaints in the church, don't complain about that, but be patient about it because like things like that will get worked out. I think that's what I'm reading.
That's one thing you get from it. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Go back to chapter 1, where he talks about count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces.
Uses patience. Yeah. The audience here must have had a problem with that if James feels it necessary to continue to bring this point up. But it's not something that we can't relate to either, I don't think, in our lives, because oftentimes we aren't patient enough. Even as Christians, one of the things that we wait and long for is the relief from this life and waiting for heaven and looking forward to that. But any other thoughts? What's the purpose of this passage?
I see where he's talking so much about patience and murmuring, not brother against brother. So evidently they were having a problem where someone they were murmuring against each other. They weren't patient with one another. It talks about how the husbandman waits for the fruit of the earth. He waits for the early and the latter rains.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, after the first rain, he doesn't go out there and expect just bam to find it. So it may also be talking about trouble with brothers, where when you have trouble with a brother, you go to him, and the first time you go to him, it may not be resolved. You may have to go again and again, but be patient with that and understand that there is patience in dealing with one another and not to murmur against them. If someone's doing something that is not correct, sometimes when you go to them the first time, the first thing that happens is they get mad. They don't want to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's expected. Because we have to realize how we might react if someone came to us and told us we were doing something that we thought was okay when we were told it's not. We may get mad. Be patient with them. Don't murmur against them just because they haven't responded immediately. Continue to be patient and work with them.
And again, that goes to the heart of pride as far as that point goes. Because it seems to be the more mature a Christian is, then the better capable they are of handling constructive criticism, or even being being made accountable if they are in sin, and understand the need to have that brother to come to them and say, "Hey, you're not doing what's right," and to take it and to address it in a patient way if the person is not as willing to accept that. Can anyone think of any people in the Bible who had patience and persevered? Job, yeah. And that's one that James had already mentioned, I think, right? In this passage, talked about Job and how he was stricken with multiple things, land taken away, possessions, family. And in the end, Job ended up coming out ahead. He persevered. He was patient and he persevered. Went through a lot. Who else in the Bible? What you got, Brother Steve? Noah. That's a really good example. Because I've heard it talked about before. Imagine being Noah himself, building this huge monstrosity, everybody's seeing what's going on, and you're the skeptical and talk of the neighborhood, so to speak, and being patient and enduring something like that, it's kind of humiliating. But if you have your priorities in place, as Noah did, then again, I guess you'll persevere, just as Noah did. 8 souls were saved. Who else? Jeremiah. Now help me out with Jeremiah, because and I'm going to be honest with you, the prophets are not something that I'm 100% familiar with, and I feel like that's something that we end up lacking in study in the church. But for your point with Jeremiah,
he was known as the weeping prophet because of everything that happened to him. I mean, he had so many things that were brought upon him. The times he was in prison, the times that he was not listened to. I mean, he was a very patient man. True, there were times he did not want to continue, but he couldn't help it. He said that the word, that it burned within him. So
right.
he had no choice. I mean, Jeremiah is a very interesting prophet when you study it.
Yeah. And that was, Jeremiah is probably one of the better examples because of what you're talking about, where he felt compelled to do the work that he was assigned to do. But many of the prophets were, their message fell on deaf ears, and many of them had to be patient, I believe. Some of them even feared for their life at times with King Ahab and Jezebel whenever they were doing the things that they did. Jeremiah, yeah. Anyone else in the Bible? Joseph, yes. Being thrown into the pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and he ended up enduring and going through a lot of hardships, but ended up becoming one of the men in a leadership position and setting a good example and probably even providing a way for the beginning of God's people. Yeah. So, and there are many other examples. I'm sure that some of us are even running through our minds right now of people that were patient. Abraham and Sarah was one that I thought of. Simeon, the priest in Luke 2:22 through 35, waited for the birth of Jesus. God told him that he promised, "You will not see death until you see the Messiah." And Simeon was patient and he waited for that. Any other comments as far as patience? This is a really rich passage. And I know that whenever it comes to patience, I've already said before, this is something that we just as human beings struggle with. Many of the examples that were mentioned, especially like in the case of the prophets in Jeremiah, you see the humanity of some of the prophets whenever the Old Testament talks about the times that they would go to God, and sometimes they would almost go to the point of complaining to say that, nobody else is around. I'm the only person that's here. God, are you going to help me? Are you going to be there for me? And of course, God's going to be there for those that are faithful to Him, and He will always deliver and find a way for those that are faithful to Him. So why is it such a struggle for us?
We live in a society where everything is now. It's instantaneous. You want information, you get on the internet, you get it now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not a patient people because of the instant, the microwave. You throw things in the microwave, you eat now.
Right.
I mean, you think about, I think about kids today, they get on a computer, and if it doesn't pop up there within just a few seconds, they start getting upset.
Guilty, yeah.
Whereas you go back years ago, if you wanted something, you didn't get on the internet, you went to the library. And then you searched to find it. What takes you minutes to find took hours before.
Yeah, card catalog, library, I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we live in a society that says, I want it now. There is no patience in today's society. And that's a problem for us in understanding how to be patient.
Now, I believe that it's always been there because that's just inherent to us as human beings, but I think it's gotten worse as a result of these technologies that you're talking about. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Brother Steve?
Yeah, that's something I've always thought about too, kind of what Jack was talking about, how everything's now, and kind of what I was saying earlier, in a lesson about people being distracted by things that are not necessarily sinful. It's like technology and inventions, modern inventions that we have and all. Well, everybody looks at it. I mean, the world at large like, well, maybe we shouldn't do it just because we can do it. And I'm not talking, about moral things. I'm talking about just because we're able to do something, it may be quicker. It might not be better.
Right.
It can be like Paul said, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient.
Yeah.
It might not be good for us to have, so much technology. A lot of people probably scoff at that statement. But I wonder if there are many qualities in life and in character that we miss out on developing because we're so hopped up on getting technologically advanced. And patience being one of them. Maybe we've lost the idea of training ourselves to be patient because we're so dissatisfied until we can have everything done quicker and then quicker and then quicker.
Yeah.
We're never satisfied with the speed we're at. We're always trying to make things faster. We're never satisfied. And it's like, well, where does it stop? It's like, well, maybe we need to turn around and look the other way sometimes.
You know, I have a hand right.
Yeah, just 1 second. Go ahead.
But one thing I think of is really hard for me right now, that God has a schedule, and we want it on our time, but God has a plan on when things can happen.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what's hard is when you keep praying for it, and it's not happening, and you feel like you just want a little piece of God to give you
Yeah.
the hint of when the time is.
And begin to lose heart, I guess. Yeah. Because it does, I know it's not coming to me right now, but I know there are other passages that reassure us that it is on God's schedule. I guess even with Abraham and Sarah is a good example there. Go ahead.
Yeah, 'cause in Genesis 18:14, it's just, is anything too hard for the Lord? Reminding me that He has the power.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And again, that is right along with Abraham and Sarah. Thank you. Yeah. Holly?
I want to get your comment about what you said to Jack, that it was making me think of my own children and society. I do feel like I can see it a little more clearer now, even more so, because when you think about generations before the Industrial Revolution, and machinery that aided men, which did away with massive jobs, by the way. Scaled man down because you don't need 100, you only need 5. But so it really hurt the home there. But it just, men children I think learned patience by having to, you had to sow and then wait for the harvest. And nowadays, I mean, you walk through Walmart and everything's impulse. The kids go, can I have this? Can I have that?
Yeah,
It's always,
yeah.
Sure, honey, sure, honey. Why not? I didn't have, I couldn't have. And from childhood, they used to be taught patience from childhood.
Right.
And now it's instant gratification from the time that they're big enough to ask for it. And I think we're teaching it to them.
Yeah.
And it just becomes, as that grows through their childhood into their adulthood, it becomes something that is totally crowded their heart, and they can't see the forest for the trees.
Right.
It's grown up all around them.
The culture definitely doesn't help because it's something that's kind of expected of us. Where does the comment about being in the world but not being of the world exactly fit whenever it comes to, okay, well, what is a Christian supposed to do then in that example, like what you're talking about, where the kids are just going through the store and they're like, well, let's get this and let's have that. And, well, what do? Do you just go to the extreme and take them out of the store and so that they aren't tempted by any of that stuff? As a parent, what are you supposed to do? I think that there needs to be some healthy balance that's there, and an emphasis probably placed in the home and examples set by the parents under those circumstances, so that the children understand clearly where the principles that need to be taught, what they need to learn. Would you agree? Feel the same way, or?
We try with our kids to teach them to save, and not everything. If you want something, you got to hold on to your money for it.
Yeah.
And when you spend it, it's gone.
It's gone.
But I just think that it was a little more clear when you made your comment to Jack, thinking back to the generations before that. They had to wait. They couldn't. They didn't have the machines or the fast
Yeah.
You know, that we're that feeding. I think it just, I don't know. I was seeing it more with me having children, thinking I think this starts a whole lot sooner than we think.
I see what you're saying now. I've heard it said before as well that whenever it comes to our technology, we end up putting a whole lot of stress on ourselves because of how much faster things are going these days. But anyway, let's see here. Well, I think this is actually at a good stopping point now. I look at the clock. I wanted to get a little bit farther. I think Sean's expected to be back next week. Is that right? Yeah. He will be back. Jennifer's saying he will be back next week. Okay. Well, I actually wouldn't mind. I'll talk with him about it because I'm prepared to go through the remainder of the chapter. That'll give him a break, recover from Jamaica. Thank you, everyone, for your comments.